We're burning and she's in there.
Just before noon, the Will County, Illinois Emergency Dispatch Center received a high-priority call. The initial information logged by the operator was incomplete, unstructured, and fragmented. The only detail that could be confirmed immediately was that a landlord was allegedly attacking a child. There was no clear description of the injuries, no confirmation of how many victims there might be, and no reliable indication of whether the threat had ended or was still ongoing. In emergency response systems, any situation involving a child is treated as exceptionally serious. That single factor alone is enough to trigger a multi-agency deployment. Officers from the nearest units were dispatched immediately, along with emergency medical personnel and any additional support resources deemed necessary. Response time was reduced to the absolute minimum because, in cases like this, every minute can mean the difference between life and death. Patrol vehicles moved toward the provided address through the normal midday traffic of a suburban neighborhood. That time of day is not typically associated with extreme acts of violence. People were still moving about, ordinary routines were still unfolding, and from the outside there was nothing to suggest that a tragedy was unfolding behind the door of a seemingly quiet home. That contrast only heightened the abnormal nature of the call. When the first units reached the area, they conducted an initial survey of the scene according to standard safety procedures. This was not a neighborhood known for serious violent incidents, but that did not reduce their caution. If anything, it forced them to evaluate the situation more carefully because the most dangerous events often occur in places where no one expects them. One key detail was recorded almost immediately. The back door of the house was open. In the context of a call involving an assault, an open door can mean several things. It could indicate that a struggle had just taken place. It could suggest the suspect had fled. Or it could mean the threat was still inside. None of those possibilities allowed for complacency. As soon as the officers exited their vehicles, they activated their body-worn cameras. These devices are designed to document the entire response from the moment of arrival, ensuring transparency, supporting later investigation, and allowing an accurate reconstruction of events. The early footage shows the intensity and focus of the responding officers. There was no reckless rushing, but there was also no hesitation. Every movement reflected training and field experience. The officers split into teams to cover the area effectively. One group remained outside to secure the perimeter and control access points. The other moved closer to the home, focusing on the open back door. This division of tasks reduces risk and ensures that no critical area is overlooked during the first decisive minutes. Officers repeatedly issued commands for anyone inside to come out. This is part of standard procedure, intended to identify whether someone is still inside and to give uninvolved individuals a safe chance to exit the danger zone. But there was no response. The silence stretched on, increasing tension. In situations like this, silence is not reassuring. It is often a sign that something more serious has happened. Body camera footage captured each moment of the approach. It shows officers moving carefully, controlling blind corners and narrow spaces, prepared for any threat that might appear. The inside of the home seemed unnaturally quiet. Natural light filtered through only a few windows, creating a heavy, dim atmosphere. In that environment, every small detail becomes significant. These first minutes are critical in any major incident. They are the phase when officers must make decisions under pressure, with incomplete information, limited time, and unpredictable risk. Following procedure is not only about protecting officer safety, it also ensures that every action can later be verified and evaluated objectively. In that context, the body-worn camera becomes indispensable. It does not merely record what happens, it reflects the urgency and psychological weight of the moment. Every breath, every footstep, every subtle movement is preserved, forming a chain of data that becomes essential for later analysis. Such footage helps the public better understand how serious events are handled from the earliest seconds, when there are no conclusions yet, no formal accusations, and every possibility remains open. The approach to the scene in the Will County attack highlights how fragile the boundary can be between ordinary life and catastrophe. Just minutes earlier, the area was part of routine daily life. But once the emergency call came in, everything changed. Trained professionals, prepared to face the worst, had to step into an environment where the consequences of violence were beginning to take shape, even though no one yet knew how severe they truly were. At this stage, no conclusions were drawn. There were no statements about motive, no confirmed identification of victims or suspects. There was only one undeniable reality. A child had been reported as assaulted, and officers had to do everything possible to secure safety, gather information, and control the situation. Speculation had to be set aside in favor of procedure and professional responsibility. These initial minutes of the Will County response, captured fully on body camera footage, are not merely the opening of a major criminal case. They are evidence of how law enforcement systems react to incomplete but high-risk information. From the first call to the moment officers approach the home, each step illustrates the necessity of a fast, organized response grounded in safety principles. This is the stage that lays the foundation for everything that follows. What is recorded in those first minutes affects not only rescue efforts and victim protection, but also the integrity of evidence, the transparency of procedure, and the ability to uncover the truth. In this case, those early moments opened the door to a chain of events that would expose one of the most serious attacks the area had ever seen. An incident with consequences far beyond one home or one family. When officers completed the initial approach and determined that the immediate threat could not yet be ruled out, they began moving deeper into the home. This marked a critical transition. The priority shifted from controlling the outside environment to locating victims and assessing injuries. In cases involving children, every step is treated with maximum urgency because survival can depend almost entirely on the speed of the earliest response. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavy and abnormal. From the outside, there had been no obvious signs of major disruption, but as officers advanced, it became clear this was no longer simply a vague call with limited information. The first indicators of a serious incident began to appear, forcing responders to move from a precautionary posture to full emergency intervention. In one area of the home, officers and medical personnel found a young boy, approximately 6 years old, in critical condition. Immediately, all priorities shifted to life-saving efforts. Emergency responders conducted a rapid medical assessment and requested additional support. Body camera footage captured the coordinated movement of responders, fast but controlled, with each person performing a defined role based on training. The injuries on the child's body indicated that this was not an accident or an isolated minor incident. The nature and extent of the wounds reflected severe violence, placing responders under extreme pressure. In such moments, multiple emergency procedures occur simultaneously, controlling bleeding, evaluating breathing, checking responsiveness, and preparing for immediate transport if survival remains possible. Although medical efforts began at once, later investigative findings determined that the child's injuries were too severe. The wounds were not only numerous but also fatal in nature. That conclusion came later, but at the time of rescue, responders continued working, because in emergency medicine, even the smallest chance must be pursued. While one group concentrated fully on the child, other officers expanded their search through the house to ensure no additional victims were in need of immediate aid. This parallel response, rescue and search at the same time, is essential in complex scenes, maximizing time and resources. In another area, officers located an adult woman suffering from serious injuries. She was identified as the child's mother. Signs indicated she had endured a violent assault. As soon as she was found, she was moved out of the danger area for emergency treatment. Medical personnel rapidly assessed her condition, stabilized vital signs, and prepared for transport to an appropriate hospital. The discovery of the mother alive, though critically injured, marked a major turning point. Not only because her life could potentially be saved, but because she might later provide crucial information to clarify what happened. Still, at that moment, the only priority remained: preserving life. Any questioning was postponed until her medical condition could be stabilized. All of this unfolded in a short but intensely pressurized window. Officers had to coordinate continuously with medical teams, keep pathways clear, maintain control of the scene, and ensure security. The body camera footage captured this rapid shift from tactical caution to emergency rescue, showing how responders adapted to the reality in front of them. Later investigations confirmed that the child, identified as Wadi al-Fayumi, did not survive due to the severity of his injuries. Though this was announced afterward, even at the time of discovery, responders understood the chances were extremely small. Accurate documentation of the initial condition of the victims became critical evidence for the investigation and later prosecution. The emergency medical response in Will County demonstrated how vital interagency coordination is in extreme violence cases. There is no rigid separation between police work and medical intervention. Instead, both roles become tightly linked, with each decision affecting the outcome. In such situations, even a short delay can lead to irreversible consequences. The images and data gathered during this phase serve not only criminal investigation but a broader purpose, evaluating how systems respond to severe violence. Locating victims, delivering aid, and securing the scene are foundational to both transparency and effectiveness in the justice process. This second phase ended when the victims were transported to medical care and the home was secured under law enforcement control. From that moment, the focus shifted from rescue to investigation, from emergency response to determining criminal responsibility. What happened inside the home in those first minutes left a lasting impact, not only on the responders but on the community and the broader society. At this stage, what began as an emergency call had become a major criminal case with devastating consequences. Rescue efforts, though unable to change the tragic outcome for the child, remained critical in preserving the life of the surviving victim and ensuring that the truth of the event could be uncovered fully and transparently. When the victims had been removed from the home and transported for emergency medical care, the focus of law enforcement shifted immediately. What had started as a rescue scene was now clearly the site of a brutal, violent attack, possibly a homicide. From that point forward, the next priority became identifying the suspect's location and ensuring the immediate threat to the public had been fully neutralized. The fact that the suspect was not immediately located made the situation highly unstable. Officers could not rule out the possibility that the attacker was still inside the home or nearby. Following standard protocol, the perimeter expanded. Exits were checked, surrounding areas were partially sealed off, and officers began systematic searches to prevent escape and further harm. One key element remained critical during this phase. The back door was still open. To investigators, details like an open door, movement paths, or displaced objects can become significant. Officers understood that the suspect may have exited through that door, may have moved into the yard, or could still be in the area, possibly injured. During the first sweep of the rear area, one officer observed an unusual presence outside. However, in those earliest moments, there was no clear confirmation of the suspect. This reflects a common reality during high-stress emergencies. The intense flood of information and pressure can cause crucial details to be missed for seconds at a time. Only moments later, after adjustments in observation and coordination, officers spotted an elderly man lying on the ground behind the home. The location and context immediately suggested he could be the attacker. The response level escalated instantly. Approaching a suspect in such a case carries significant risk. Officers must balance personal safety, public safety, and the need to stop a suspect who may still be armed. The approach was careful and coordinated, supported by multiple units to reduce the chance of error. The man was quickly secured and placed in handcuffs to eliminate the risk of continued violence. At this point, officers did not attempt to gather a detailed statement. Their priority was ensuring the suspect was disarmed and medically assessed. That step is essential not only for safety, but also for ensuring legal integrity and transparency in the arrest process. Preliminary identification confirmed the man as Joseph Chuba, 71 years old, the owner of the home where the attack occurred. That information immediately clarified the direct relationship between the suspect and the victims. The fact that he was the landlord, living in the same residence as the family for an extended period, raised deeper questions about motive and escalation. During the immediate on-scene evaluation, officers documented that the suspect had injuries of his own. Following procedure, these injuries were recorded carefully to ensure clarity, accountability, and to prevent later disputes about how injuries occurred during arrest. Medical personnel were requested to assess his condition before transfer. Meanwhile, officers continued to clear the home, checking additional floors and rooms to ensure no other victims were present and no further threats remained. Multiple sweeps reflected the seriousness of the incident and the need to eliminate all uncertainty. Items potentially connected to the attack were identified and preserved for forensic analysis. Every detail, from object placement to visible evidence, was treated as a crucial puzzle piece to reconstruct events. Identifying the weapon and its use would later become central to confirming intent and severity. Once the suspect was secured and removed from immediate proximity, the scene transitioned into full investigative control. Boundaries were established, areas were divided for investigators and responders, and access was restricted. This protected evidence and ensured the integrity of the upcoming forensic process. Confirming the suspect's identity and relationship to the victims shaped the investigative direction. What began as a vague report became a clear picture of deliberate violence inside a shared living space between landlord and tenants. The case immediately expanded beyond a routine incident into a major criminal investigation. Body camera footage from the arrest phase became a key component of the case file. It recorded the arrest procedure, the suspect's condition, and the actions of officers, providing visual confirmation of lawful protocol. In high-profile cases, that level of documentation is essential for maintaining public trust. With the suspect secured and medically assessed, investigators prepared for the next stage, collecting evidence, analyzing motive, and building the prosecution case. But even before those steps began, one reality was already clear. The immediate danger was contained, yet the legal and social consequences of the attack were only beginning to unfold. This phase ended with the suspect in custody and the scene fully controlled. The situation shifted from emergency response to structured investigation. The events surrounding the suspect's discovery and capture ensured community safety and laid the groundwork for establishing criminal responsibility. By this point, the incident in Will County had moved far beyond a domestic dispute or isolated attack. It was now a major violent crime with signs of deliberate intent. The suspect's arrest ended one chapter of crisis, but opened larger questions about motive, prejudice, and how forces outside a single home can contribute to tragedy. Once the suspect was secured and the scene came under complete control, the Will County case entered a new phase. Systematic investigation. This stage is decisive. It is where every detail, no matter how small, can shape how the case is understood, charged, and eventually judged in court. The questions were no longer only what happened, but also why did it happen, and how should legal responsibility be established. Investigators began by preserving and documenting the entire crime scene. Each room in the home was marked, photographed, measured, and mapped. The goal was to reconstruct the attack precisely, identifying where victims were located, how the suspect moved through the home, and how the weapon was used. In major violent crimes, reconstruction is essential because it allows investigators to compare physical evidence with statements, footage, and timelines. The weapon was collected and transferred to forensic labs for analysis. Biological traces, fingerprints, and the physical condition of the weapon provided crucial insight into the intensity and nature of the assault. Early findings indicated a level of violence beyond a brief impulsive act, raising strong indicators of intent to cause serious injury, possibly to kill. Alongside forensic work, investigators collected testimony from relevant individuals. The surviving mother became a central witness. Once medically stabilized, her statement was taken carefully and with appropriate support to ensure accuracy and dignity. Her information provided context leading up to the attack, including the relationship with the landlord and the tension that had been building beforehand. Evidence showed that the suspect and victims were not strangers. They had shared living space for a significant period. This made the case even more disturbing. Physical proximity did not lead to understanding, but instead allowed hostility and prejudice to accumulate over time. Investigators widened their evidence search to indirect sources as well. The suspect's personal history, behavioral patterns, relationships, and signs of psychological or emotional changes were evaluated. The broader social context at the time of the attack was also examined, as prosecutors noted a potential connection between the violence and heightened global tensions occurring during the same period. A crucial factor that emerged was motive rooted in hatred. Evidence, witness accounts, supporting documentation, and prior statements suggested the assault was not random. It appeared linked to hostility toward the family's religious identity and background. That element elevated the legal seriousness of the case because hate-motivated crimes do not only harm individuals, they threaten social stability and community safety. Prosecutors began constructing the case file based on investigative findings. Charging decisions required careful legal accuracy. Possible charges included murder, attempted murder, and hate crime enhancements. Each charge comes with distinct legal standards that must be proven, requiring close coordination between detectives, prosecutors, and forensic experts. Body camera footage continued to play a major role. The recordings from the moment officers arrived, located victims, and detained the suspect created a continuous visual evidence chain. These materials helped clarify facts and reduced room for dispute about what responders encountered at the scene. At the same time, public attention intensified. Media coverage focused not only on the brutality of the crime, but also on the identity of the victims and the allegation of hate motivation. This scrutiny increased pressure on the justice system to act transparently and fairly. Investigators faced the complex challenge of proving hate motivation, which requires evidence of intent, often the most difficult element to establish legally. However, the growing body of information built a clearer picture of prejudice and hostility behind the attack. Once investigation was completed, the case moved into formal prosecution. The state presented detailed charges describing the events, the devastating outcome, and the alleged motive. The prosecution was not only about punishing one person, it was about sending a message that violence rooted in hate will meet severe legal consequences. Evidence was presented systematically: forensic results, witness statements, and body camera documentation. Each element reinforced the conclusion that this was not an accidental tragedy, but a deliberate act of violence tied to prejudice. The legal process ended with the suspect convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term, reflecting the severity of the crime. No sentence can restore a lost child, but the outcome affirmed a core principle. Violence driven by hatred is not tolerated, and legal accountability must follow. After the verdict was reached and the legal case was closed, the Will County attack did not simply end with courtroom procedures. Instead, it produced lasting shockwaves throughout the local community, broader society, and public understanding of how hatred can turn into deadly violence. This is the stage where a criminal case extends beyond the legal system and becomes a profound social lesson about responsibility, humanity, and the value of life. The death of a 6-year-old child cannot be measured only through statutes or years of imprisonment. It became a shared psychological wound. In the days following the attack, the community fell under a heavy sense of grief. People brought flowers, candles, and children's toys to spontaneous memorials, not as protest, but as a collective response to a loss that could never be repaired. Community organizations, religious leaders, and civil society groups spoke out, not only to honor the victim, but to warn about the danger of hateful language and extremist thinking. Vigils, gatherings, and public dialogues highlighted a key truth: violence does not emerge in a vacuum. It often begins with prejudice, with dehumanization, with treating someone as a threat instead of a human being. The case also raised a larger question about social responsibility: how early signs of hatred can be recognized and prevented. In many cases, radicalization does not explode overnight. It accumulates, fed by fear, misinformation, isolation, and lack of meaningful human contact across differences. When those signs are ignored or minimized, the consequences can become irreversible. From a media perspective, the case became a clear example of the power of objective documentation. Body camera footage did not only support the investigation, it helped the public understand what actually happened, reducing speculation and distortion. But media coverage also faced a challenge: reporting truthfully without inflaming hatred further, and honoring victims without turning tragedy into sensationalism. For the victim's family, legal justice does not equal full healing. The loss of a child is beyond repair. But a fair and serious prosecution delivers one crucial outcome: official recognition that what happened was wrong, unacceptable, and that society stands with the victims. That recognition is a first step, small but meaningful toward healing. More broadly, the case became a strong reminder of the value of every human life, especially the lives of children. A child carries no responsibility for adult conflicts, global politics, or religious tensions. When a young life is taken by hatred, it is not only a personal crime, it is a failure of the wider social system to protect the most vulnerable. Researchers and experts in extremism prevention also treated the case as a study example. They examined how international events can influence individual psychology, especially when information is consumed in a narrow and unchecked way. They emphasized that hate-driven violence often arises not from one event, but from a chain of factors: isolation, fear, anger, and lack of mental health support. The case highlighted the role of local institutions in identifying risk early. Community education, mental health support, and intercultural dialogue were identified as essential tools to prevent violence before it occurs. Such investments do not produce instant results, but over time they can save innocent lives. On a personal level, the case forces a difficult question: what have we done, or failed to do, to prevent hatred from taking root? Silence in the face of extremist speech, indifference toward discrimination, can create the environment where violence grows. Responsibility does not rest only with government and law enforcement, but with individuals and how they respond to injustice. Looking back, the most painful element is not only the brutality, but the normalization of hatred before it turns violent. Small biases, insulting language, and dehumanizing assumptions, if left unchallenged, can accumulate into irreversible harm. That is the core lesson. Violence does not appear suddenly, and therefore, it can be prevented when society acts early enough. Part 5 closes not with graphic detail or legal technicalities, but with a human reflection. The value of life does not depend on origin, religion, or identity. Every person has the right to safety and dignity. When a life is taken by hatred, society loses part of its humanity. Retelling this case is not meant to create fear. It is meant to remind us of shared responsibility, the duty to protect children, to confront hatred, and to build a society where difference does not lead to violence. Only then can an irreversible tragedy become a lesson that carries meaning for the future.